There was a night in March 1997 when 16 nuclear missiles at an Air Force base in Montana went through launch sequences without human authorization. For 47 seconds, systems that are designed with multiple redundancies and fail-safes to prevent exactly this scenario showed active preparation for launch. Targeting data loaded, fuel systems pressurized, safety protocols bypassed, and then, as suddenly as it started, everything stopped and reset to standby status. No launch occurred, no warheads left their silos, but for those 47 seconds, the world came closer to nuclear catastrophe than at any point since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and almost nobody knows it happened because the incident was classified at the highest level and buried so deep that even most people in the nuclear command structure were never briefed on the full details. My name is Colonel David Morse, retired Air Force, and I was the senior officer on duty at that strategic missile wing the night systems went rogue. I'm 68 years old now, with stage 4 cancer that's given me maybe 3 months to live. I've decided I can't take this secret to my grave. What happened that night, what we discovered in the investigation that followed, and why it was classified so aggressively, these are things the American people deserve to know, even if the truth is terrifying in ways that conventional nuclear war scenarios aren't. Because what we learned was that our nuclear arsenal, the most destructive weapons humanity has ever created, are vulnerable to interference from sources we don't understand and can't defend against. The base was Malmstrom Air Force Base, one of 3 locations in the United States that house Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missiles, each missile carrying a nuclear warhead with yield measured in hundreds of kilotons. These aren't tactical weapons meant for battlefield use. They're strategic weapons designed to destroy cities, to retaliate against nuclear attack with overwhelming force. The doctrine is called mutually assured destruction, and it's kept an uneasy peace for decades, based on the principle that nobody will start a nuclear war if they know it guarantees their own annihilation. But that doctrine depends absolutely on human control of launch authority, on the certainty that missiles only fly when authorized through proper command channels. What happened in March 1997 shattered that certainty in ways that forced complete reevaluation of assumptions about nuclear security. I was 41 years old that night, been in the Air Force for 19 years, specifically trained in nuclear operations for the last 12. I'd held every position in the command structure, from junior missile combat crew officer to senior controller, knew those systems better than anything else in my life. The Minuteman III launch process requires multiple layers of authorization, physical keys that have to be turned simultaneously by officers positioned too far apart for one person to reach both, codes that change daily and are verified through secure channels, and electronic safeguards that prevent any single point of failure from initiating launch. The system was designed by paranoid engineers during the Cold War to be absolutely fail-safe, to make unauthorized launch physically impossible through any combination of human error or malicious action. The evening started normally. I was in the underground launch control facility, a hardened bunker designed to survive nearby nuclear strikes, with Captain Jennifer Hayes, my deputy controller. We'd been on shift for 6 hours of a 24-hour rotation, going through standard system checks and monitoring protocols. The boards showed all green, all systems nominal, no alerts or anomalies. It was tedious work that was simultaneously crucial and mind-numbingly routine. You had to stay alert and focused while nothing whatsoever was happening, maintaining readiness for an event that you hoped would never occur, but had to be prepared to execute perfectly if ordered. At 22:17 hours, the first anomaly appeared. Launch Facility 7, one of the missile silos under our command authority, showed a status change from standby to active monitoring. This wasn't normal, but also wasn't immediately alarming. Active monitoring status can be triggered by maintenance activity or scheduled tests, but there was no maintenance scheduled for LF7 that night and no test protocols active. I called the security team at LF-7 and they reported everything normal. No personnel in the facility, no indication of any system activation, but the board still showed active monitoring status. Then LF-14 changed status. Then LF-3. Within 90 seconds, all 16 silos under our control showed active monitoring, which was impossible without command authorization that we hadn't given. Captain Hayes was on the phone with Wing Command while I was running diagnostics trying to identify what was causing the status changes. Every diagnostic came back normal. No system errors, no communication glitches, no indication of anything wrong except that the missiles were activating themselves without human input. At 22:19, the situation escalated catastrophically. LF-7's status changed from active monitoring to launch preparation. This is a status that should only occur after receiving properly authenticated launch orders from the President through the Nuclear Command Authority. It requires specific unlock codes, physical key turns, multiple verification steps, none of which had occurred. But the missile was entering launch preparation anyway, as if it had received orders from somewhere we couldn't detect. Then all 16 showed launch preparation status simultaneously. I felt my blood go cold because I understood what I was seeing, even though it shouldn't be possible. Our nuclear missiles were preparing to launch without authorization, bypassing every safeguard and failsafe that decades of engineering had built into the system. Captain Hayes was shouting into the phone at Wing Command. Alarms were screaming, and I was watching the status boards show progression through launch sequence that should have been impossible without our direct action. Targeting data loaded into the missile computers, not default test coordinates but actual strategic targets that I recognized from classified briefings. Moscow, Beijing, Pyongyang, every hostile capital and military installation programmed into our targeting database was being assigned to missiles that were preparing to deliver nuclear warheads without human authorization. The fuel systems pressurized, the silo doors began their opening sequence, massive reinforced concrete panels sliding aside to give the missiles a clear path to launch. And the safety interlocks that prevent accidental launch, multiple redundant systems that all had to be manually disabled before launch could proceed, they were bypassing themselves one after another like dominoes falling. Wing Command was screaming at us through the phone, asking what the hell we were doing, assuming we'd somehow initiated this sequence. I was screaming back that we hadn't touched anything, that the missiles were activating autonomously. Captain Hayes was at the control panel frantically entering abort codes, but nothing was responding. The system had locked us out completely. We had no control, no ability to stop what was happening. For those seconds, we were just observers watching our nuclear arsenal prepare to start World War III without human decision-making any part of the process. At 22:20, with 16 missiles in final launch sequence, their engines about to ignite and send multiple megatons of nuclear destruction toward targets across the northern hemisphere, everything stopped. Not gradually winding down, but instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. Status boards reset to standby, silo doors halted their opening and began closing, targeting data cleared from missile computers, safety interlocks re-engaged. In less than 3 seconds, all systems returned to normal standby status as if nothing had happened. But it had happened. For 47 seconds, by official time measurement, our missiles had been preparing to launch without authorization, and then something had stopped them just as mysteriously as it had started them. The silence in the control bunker was absolute. Captain Hayes and I looked at each other with expressions that I'm sure mirrored the pure terror I felt. We'd just witnessed something that contradicted everything we understood about nuclear weapons safety. These systems don't just activate themselves. The engineering specifically prevents that through multiple independent safeguards. Yet it had happened, and we had no explanation for how or why, only the certainty that something had taken control of our missiles and then released them before launch occurred. Wing Command ordered immediate lockdown of the entire base.
Within 15 minutes, every missile silo was swarmed by security teams doing physical inspections. Technical specialists were brought in to examine every component of the launch control systems, and investigators from Air Force Office of Special Investigations arrived by helicopter within an hour to begin what would become the most intensive and secretive investigation in the history of our nuclear weapons program. If you've ever wondered whether our nuclear arsenal is as secure as we're told it is, share your thoughts in the comments below.
The investigation lasted 6 months and involved hundreds of personnel with specialized clearances. Every component of the launch control system was examined at the molecular level. Every line of code in the computer systems was analyzed for anomalies or unauthorized modifications. Every person who'd had any access to the facilities in the previous year was investigated for possible sabotage or espionage. Security footage from the missile silos was reviewed frame by frame, looking for any evidence of physical tampering. And the investigation found nothing. No mechanical failures, no software glitches, no human interference, no explanation whatsoever for how 16 missiles could enter launch sequence without authorization and then stop just as inexplicably. But what the investigation did find was a historical pattern that had been buried in classified archives. Similar incidents had occurred before, not as severe as the March 1997 event, but following the same basic pattern of missiles activating without authorization and then resetting. An incident at Minot Air Force Base in 1984, where 5 missiles showed anomalous status changes for 20 seconds before returning to normal. An event at Warren Air Force Base in 1991, where missile targeting systems loaded coordinates that nobody had input. These incidents had been classified and treated as isolated technical glitches, each one investigated separately without anyone apparently connecting them into a pattern. The pattern suggested something was interfacing with our nuclear systems periodically, testing them perhaps, or demonstrating capability to take control if it chose to. The intelligence analysts who briefed us on their findings were visibly uncomfortable with their own conclusions. They couldn't identify the source of interference, couldn't determine whether it was foreign intelligence service, domestic sabotage, or something else entirely. But they were certain it wasn't random technical failure, because the probability of the specific sequence of failsafes all bypassing simultaneously was astronomically small, effectively impossible without deliberate external action. What happened next is why I'm speaking out now, despite the legal consequences. The investigation's findings were classified beyond top secret under a special access program that limited knowledge to maybe 50 people total. I was ordered to sign non-disclosure agreements with provisions I'd never seen before, including acknowledgement that discussing the incident could result in indefinite detention without trial under national security provisions. Captain Hayes and I were separated, reassigned to different bases on opposite sides of the country, with specific orders to never discuss what we'd witnessed with each other or anyone else. The official records were sanitized to show routine maintenance activity that night, with no mention of the 47 seconds when our missiles prepared to launch autonomously. But the most disturbing part came during my final classified briefing before reassignment. A colonel from Strategic Command, a man whose name I was ordered never to repeat, told me off the record that the March 97 incident wasn't isolated to Malmstrom. Similar events had occurred at all 3 Minuteman bases within a 2-week period, suggesting coordinated interference with our entire land-based nuclear arsenal. And there was intelligence, which he couldn't share details about, suggesting that Russian and Chinese nuclear systems had experienced similar anomalies around the same time. Whatever was interfacing with our missiles wasn't targeting American systems specifically, but rather seemed to be demonstrating capability to affect nuclear weapons globally. The hypothesis, never officially stated but clearly implied, was that some external intelligence was monitoring and occasionally interfering with nuclear weapons systems worldwide. Whether this was extremely advanced human technology from an unknown source or something non-human was debated in classified circles, but the practical effect was the same. Our nuclear arsenal, which we believed was under absolute human control, was actually vulnerable to external influence that we couldn't prevent or even fully detect. The implications for deterrence doctrine and nuclear security were catastrophic. How do you maintain mutually assured destruction if you can't be certain your weapons will function only when authorized? How do you negotiate arms control when you can't guarantee your systems are secure from third-party interference?
The official response was to upgrade security and monitoring across all nuclear facilities, to implement new safeguards designed to detect external interference, and to classify everything about the incident so thoroughly that even most people in the nuclear command structure wouldn't know what had happened. The calculation was that maintaining public confidence in nuclear security was more important than transparency about vulnerabilities that we couldn't fix. If potential adversaries learned that our nuclear systems were unreliable, it could embolden aggression. If the American public learned that our missiles could activate without authorization, it could create panic and demands for disarmament that would weaken national security. I understood the reasoning at the time and kept silent for 27 years, despite carrying knowledge that weighed on me constantly. Every time there was nuclear saber rattling in the news, every time I heard politicians or military leaders speak confidently about nuclear deterrence, I knew something they didn't know or were choosing not to acknowledge. Our weapons weren't as secure as we told the world. Something could interfere with them, and we had no idea who or what that something was, or what would happen if it decided to do more than just demonstrate capability. But I'm dying now, and I've decided that continuing to hide this serves no purpose except to protect institutions that prioritized secrecy over safety. The American people deserve to know that in March 1997, we came within 47 seconds of an unauthorized nuclear launch that could have triggered World War III. They deserve to know that similar incidents have occurred at multiple facilities over decades, and they deserve to know that despite massive investments in security and safeguards, we still don't have adequate defense against whatever intelligence is capable of interfacing with our nuclear systems. The technical details of how the interference occurred remain classified, beyond what I'm cleared to discuss even now. But what I can say is that it didn't involve physical access to the missiles or their control systems. Security at nuclear facilities is too comprehensive for someone to physically tamper with systems without being detected. The interference occurred at a level that suggested direct interaction with electronic systems, possibly through electromagnetic means we don't fully understand, or through exploitation of vulnerabilities in the computer architecture that manages launch sequences. The fact that all missiles had multiple facilities activated simultaneously suggested coordination that would be nearly impossible for conventional espionage or sabotage. In the years since 1997, I've heard through channels that shouldn't exist but do among retired personnel with shared experiences that additional incidents have occurred. Nothing as dramatic as that March night, but continuing pattern of anomalous behavior in nuclear systems that investigators can't explain through conventional technical failures. The incidents are classified immediately, the personnel involved are separated and silenced, and the pattern continues without any apparent progress toward understanding or preventing it. We're maintaining nuclear arsenals that we don't fully control and hoping that whatever intelligence has demonstrated capability to interfere with them chooses not to do so in ways that trigger catastrophe. The psychological impact of living with this knowledge was profound. I developed anxiety about nuclear security that I couldn't discuss with anyone, not my wife, not military psychologists, not anyone, because doing so would have violated my non-disclosure agreements and potentially resulted in psychiatric detention.
I'd wake up from nightmares about missiles launching without orders, about nuclear war starting through technical malfunction or external interference rather than human decision. And I'd go to work the next day and maintain the fiction that our nuclear systems were perfectly secure, that the public could trust in their safety, that deterrence doctrine was sound. Captain Hayes, my deputy controller that night, didn't handle it as well. I heard through informal channels that she'd requested psychiatric evaluation about 6 months after the incident and had been medically discharged from the Air Force with a diagnosis that was never specified, but that people whispered was related to classified stress. I tried to contact her once several years later and found that she'd disappeared completely. No social media presence, no public records, like she'd been erased or had chosen to erase herself. I don't know if she's alive or if the weight of what we witnessed broke her in ways that led to tragedy, but I think about her often and wonder if speaking out sooner could have helped her carry the burden.
The official position, if you could even get anyone to acknowledge the incident occurred, which required clearances almost nobody has, is that the March 97 event was a cascading technical failure that has been corrected through system upgrades and enhanced monitoring. But that position is either ignorant of the full pattern or deliberately deceptive. You can't fix a problem you don't understand. And we never understood what interfaced with our missiles that night, how it bypassed safeguards that should have been impossible to bypass, or why it stopped the launch sequence at the last possible moment before ignition. The most terrifying hypothesis, discussed in classified briefings but never officially endorsed, was that something was protecting us from ourselves, that external intelligence capable of interfering with nuclear systems was preventing launches rather than causing them, acting as fail-safes against human error or malicious intent. The March 97 incident, according to this hypothesis, wasn't preparation for unauthorized launch, but rather demonstration that such launch could be prevented if necessary. The missiles activated to show they could be controlled externally, then deactivated to show that control could prevent rather than cause catastrophe. If true, that hypothesis suggests we're not alone in the universe and that whatever shares space with us considers our nuclear weapons concerning enough to monitor and occasionally intervene. It suggests that nuclear war may have been prevented not just by human wisdom and deterrence doctrine, but by external intelligence ensuring we don't destroy ourselves before achieving whatever maturity or development they're waiting for us to reach. But it also means we're not truly in control of the most destructive weapons we've created, that our sense of nuclear security is illusion maintained by something we don't understand, permitting us to believe we're in charge. Share your theories about whether nuclear weapons could be monitored or controlled by intelligence we're not aware of, and whether that makes you feel safer or more concerned. I'm sharing this now, knowing that it violates every non-disclosure agreement I signed, that I'm almost certainly going to face legal consequences if this reaches wide audience, and that I'll be discredited as suffering dementia or seeking attention in my final months. But I'm 68 years old with terminal cancer, and I've decided that carrying this secret to my grave would be worse than any punishment they could impose on whatever time I have left. The American people and the world deserve to know that our nuclear arsenals experienced loss of control in March 1997, that the incident was classified and buried, and that we still don't have adequate understanding or defense against whatever was responsible. The missiles at Malmstrom are still there, still maintained in readiness, still supposedly under absolute human control. But I know better, and now you know better. What you do with that knowledge is up to you, but at least you'll make whatever decisions you make about nuclear security and deterrence doctrine with more complete information than the comfortable fiction we've been told to accept. There was a night when our nuclear missiles lost control without orders. It lasted 47 seconds, and we still don't know what stopped them from launching.
That's the truth they classified. That's the truth I'm sharing before I run out of time to speak it.